Yeah, it's actually probably one of the better admission charts that we have. Some of the other facilities have really poor admission charts, so that doesn't even trigger you to ask the right questions. So lots of things can get missed. So I picked this one today. If I'd brought one of the bad ones in, you would have not got a lot of the information that you should have.
Okay, that was good.
With clients who are elderly or, maybe have a sight impairment or whatever, you sort of have to go through the whole admission form with them. But for some people, you can get them to fill out a fair bit of it by themselves. You can see up the top of the form it says patient to complete questions 1 to 16. However, even if the client does that, you still sort of have to go back over and check because people will miss things or not understand things.
I was also quite conscious that some of the questions were really quite difficult to ask, and I think that's probably a good point. Like, I was trying to rapidly figure out how I could ask about psychiatric treatment and that sort of thing, and also some of the problems that she hinted at and operations that she hinted at. I mean, I probably should have gone more through that in more depth. So it was kind of hard sort of thing to do. I don't know whether that's useful for your students, but certainly the psychiatric treatment was a really difficult thing to try and find a way to phrase it.
And that's where I think this virtual world will be really good for the students, because they'll get to practice this before they're out there with the client, so that they learn, how to condense questions, how to look for the triggers that tell them that there's something else going on with a client.
Cool.
Even with even with the hysterectomy question, you sort of skirted around it without clarifying with her that it was a hysterectomy that she'd had. You'd gone, oh, okay, let me note that down, but hadn't said, oh, was that a hysterectomy?
Yeah, like I said, not being part of the whole nursing thing, I did find it quite difficult to phrase those questions. So it's interesting because maybe somebody that's really new to this whole thing, so if this is one of the really earlier units, you probably get some things like where they become self-conscious, similar to me, about asking about the hysterectomy or psychiatric help or et cetera, that kind of thing.
The reality is that can stay a problem for your entire nursing career. It can be really hard to ask people about drugs or alcohol or psychiatric treatment. It's not something that society accepts as, a norm, even though it can be very much a norm, and people can be embarrassed by it, and you know that you're going to ask them a question that can potentially embarrass them. So you've really got to be careful about how you ask it.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Have you thought about sort of, Yvonne, just making it a little bit more difficult by let's say the client saying, yeah, I've got cancer, or yes, I've had psychiatric treatment, and of course the student then responds, especially if the client becomes emotional to a degree, it sort of pushes it an extra step.
Yeah, what I figured that we will do is have multiple ones of these throughout their training, so that they increase in complexity, so that they start with something quite basic and then work their way up to having a much more complex client.
Cool. Would you consider this one to be really quite a basic one, a very early one?
Definitely. This is very, very basic. Yeah, nothing too much untowards going on. And it's about making sure. The biggest issue here was the husband, really, that was at home by himself with his dementia and stuff, and how much worry she would end up having about him being at home by himself.
The other point is that by going through the questions on the questionnaire, you actually get all the information, whereas sometimes someone will say something like,